Hello everybody, nice to have you here. Today we will touch one interesting topic, and it's Adobe API Mesh. And as we're already talking about API Mesh, then I decided also to make it much more interesting and add also Adobe Commerce SaaS here. So what we will do today, we will try to connect to the Adobe Commerce SaaS environment, so it's CCS, via the API Mesh and get access to the REST API, which is not so easy and not so obvious how you may think about. So today also we will talk about API Mesh hooks. The API Mesh hooks is a tools which allow you to execute different calls during your API Mesh execution. Let's have a look on the official documentation. What we can do here, we can make hooks before all. So every time when the API Mesh been hit, it will execute your hook. And hook is basically just a JavaScript file which then do the stuff you want to do with it. You can also have before all, you can have after all, so after the whole processing is done, and then you can also do after source and before source. This means you have multiple sources in your API Mesh, you can call a hook before one particular source been executed. So you're not calling it all the time, and you're only calling it in the steps when it's needed. So first of all, connecting to Adobe Commerce SaaS via the REST. It's maybe not the most obvious process, because to do it, you need first to receive the integration token from the Adobe IMS, and then use this token to access or to call the original APIs. That's a lot of text. Let's just go straight away into the doing. I guess it will be much more easier. So at the first point, let me just show you the way how you usually do it in Postman. So the easy way, first of all, let's say we're trying to access this for1 customer address endpoint from SaaS environment. And if I'll hit it, you see it's authorized request expected, and it's expecting to that I send the OAuth token with a request. How to obtain it? To obtain the OAuth token for SaaS environment, you need to create a builder application. That's what we will do. So I created a new builder application a bit in advance. Sorry for that. If you don't know how to do it, you go into projects and then just hit create new project button. It's very easy. That's what you will get when you will do this. Let's try staging environment. So to start to work with Adobe Commerce SaaS, you need to first create a new API. And that will be Adobe Commerce as a cloud service. So this API is built for authorize your user against Adobe Commerce SaaS. So then you select in server to server authentication. That's what we are trying to do, to connect our REST API to the Adobe Commerce, and then choose OAuth server to server. And then you're using your product profile, which is your system configuration. So your Adobe account configuration, in my case, it's Cloud Managers. So after that's done, you have bunch of credentials here, and what is important for you is to have those OAuth credentials, which you can get by clicking the OAuth server to server. That's a lot of them. Don't try to use them later, because I will delete this application afterwards. So then let's go to our Postman. First of all, we need to call Adobe APIs to receive the token. You need the client ID. Client ID can be found here. And then as a second, you need to have a client secret. The same, I just copied it from there, and that's the client secret. You may also have a scope. You can copy it from here. And then when you will make a call, you will receive the access token. So this token is allowed to user profile, which you selected when you created integration, to access your Adobe Commerce SaaS. And then if you will come back to our get request, we'll go to headers. We will add authorization, error, token, and then we will make a call. And then you will see the answer request does not match any road, but that's my mistake. It's because the endpoint is wrong. So the correct endpoint is this one. And after that, you'll start to get in your APIs, your response. That's response coming from SaaS, standard customer attributes, which you can use in the future. Okay, that's the first point. So that's how you authorize your Postman. against Adobe Commerce SaaS. Let's call it the easy part. Now we want to use the API mesh to convert this endpoint, for example, into the GraphQL so our frontend can use it without authorization. So that's what I want to do. I want to make this endpoint public. Don't ask me why, there's no really practical use case, but my goal is to show the way how you can do different APIs. For example, public, maybe the API mesh is under the firewall and you want that internal system can access without it, and so on and so on. But another goal of our call today is to talk about Adobe API Mesh hooks. Okay, so now if we're trying to implement Adobe Commerce SaaS integration via the mesh, it's not possible without the hooks. The reason is because you need first to request the token, then you need to get this token and to make a next call. That's something which is not allowed API mesh out of the box, and to do it, we will use the hooks before our source being executed. So what are we trying to build? We're trying to call the IMS authorization and then use this IMS authorization token to call the Adobe Commerce. And then the GraphQL will return you already the response with authorized. So we will go back to our project, we will create a new API, and we will find here Adobe API Mesh for App Builder. After that's done, you will get your API linked to your API mesh linked to your project. So it's a very basic and simple step where you already can start to create a new API mesh. Then let's go to VS Code. So then let's go and to create our new file will be mesh JSON. And for to save a time, I will already copy some part of the mesh from prepared script. So what do we have here? We have a mesh config. We have response config, which defining the headers and the course policies. That's something you, for example, don't need right now, but that's something I usually put in there because if you're using API mesh, for example, for EDS storefront or for some custom implementation, we want that our course works correctly when the system calling the target system or the target source. And then what is more important for us is we defining the new source, which called whatever you want to. In our case, it's Adobe Commerce. You define the content type, and then we define the source. The source, that's quite interesting part. Before, or if you're still working with Adobe Commerce on-premise, and if you will use it there, so that will be helpful. In the source, you can simply define your Swagger JSON schema, which is a URL / service all, I guess, don't remember exact schema, but it's there. And it's already auto-generated based on all APIs you have. With the SaaS, there are no Swagger schema available for you to use. So you need to get it. So how I get in the REST schema, you can go to the REST endpoints. You can check SaaS reference because we're on SaaS. And then you can click and download the schema. After you will download the schema, it will look like this. You will have an open API schema with all endpoints you need, and this one you already can just add to your mesh file. So what we are doing, we will place the Swagger JSON file into the same folder, but there is one but. If you'll have a look on the schema you downloaded, it contains all Adobe Commerce APIs, and this amount is growing and growing and growing. You don't want to upload it into your mesh. First of all, it's huge. Second point, it will expose all APIs you have in your schemas. The third point, you will not be able to upload it by the reason that the mesh has a limit on amount of data you can upload with it. And this file is already quite huge, so it just will not accept it. What I'm doing, I'm keeping only APIs I want to use. In my case, I want to use attributes, customer metadata, customer address. And I'm finding it here. So first of all, this text blocks you don't need at all. You need just this paths block. And after you will find it, you delete everything before, everything after, And then you will get the file with only path you will use and all definitions of this API, but nothing else. And that's you define here in the source. And that's already enough for you to generate the mesh. So I would just do it straight away. So let's go to terminal. Let's check where we are. IO where? So we are on Adobe API Mesh and CCS workspace staging. Okay, then we can just create it. IO API Mesh create mesh. This will trigger the deployment. Are you sure you want to create? Yes, I want. And let's go. You can meanwhile open this URL even if it's not ready yet. Yep, as you see, it's not existed. So let's check its status. IO API Mesh status. Okay. Okay, that's by the way some interesting finding. I honestly hit it first time, so it looks like after you create a mesh, there was some delay that it could not find it for some time. It can be just because the currently Adobe interface is quite shaky, because when I opened my account, I got an error message in Adobe. But that's okay. Let's check. Okay, we have a status, mesh provision correctly. So and after opening the URL, we can see that it's ready. We can make a call, nothing works for sure. So now let's try to make our call for get customer metadata. That's how it looks like if it's been generated then later by API Mesh. So what the API Mesh is doing is taking your REST schema and converting it to the GraphQL schema. So that's how the endpoint looks in the end. And if you will hit it, you will see here OAuth token is missing. That's the same when we saw when we hit the Postman collection without the token. So now we need to fix this issue, right? So we need to make this one work. For that, we will use the hooks and we will use before all or before source. It doesn't really matter in this case because we have only one source. So let's go back. So to define the hooks, you define in the plugin. You define in the plugins just after the source. You define in the plugin hook, and then before source, here you define in the name of your hook. It has to be matching with this one. And then you define in the file name, which is your resolver and what's been executed in this particular resolver. And that's, so you have here the path, which is equal to this path because this file is not physically exist. It's minified here in a content. And if you want to see it's not minified, let me show it to you. So that's how it looks like. That's a file which is not minified. It can be quite massive, but don't be scared. So what the hook is doing? The hook has an Adobe EMS URL. You have a scope and you have an access token, which is not existed at this moment. And let's have a look what's been called. We have inject IMS OAuth. Here, that's our function. And it's validating the context. Cool, it's validating the source name. For example, if it's not AC, then it should not be called, but that's, by the way, not needed here. I will drop it because we define in the hook not before all, but before source. So only this source will be executed. And then we only receiving the token by executing the original call, and we will go to this part. Then we take in our request headers we received, we adjusting the header. So into the header that will be sent to our original when our original REST endpoint of the Adobe Commerce, we add in the new header, which is authorization bearer token, the token we received from the EMS OAuth. And then we just return in success message and then the data where we define in the next headers. So in this case, we modifying in the header of the request that will be sent to the Adobe Commerce customer address metadata endpoint. And this modification is adding the new bearer. So in how we're receiving the token itself, we have the token, and then we we don't have a token. We need a token. We have a context, and then we requesting our token by sending the secrets EMS ID and client. So for that, by the way, good point, you need to create a new file called secrets. YAML, if I'm not mistaken. And then into this file, you add in your secrets, which are client ID and client secret, but not equal double dot. And client ID in our case is this one. And client secret in our case, this one. So the same you saw on the builder side. So this one saved. This one, again, coming back shortly, taking the secrets and then executing just a call. There is a URL, it's doing fetch of the URL and receiving the token, managing the error if the token is not there, and then bypassing and sending it further. Again, as a reminder, this file is not being executed. The executed file, which is here, minimized. So you always need to minimize this content and place it here. You can do it with Python. I'm usually doing it with ChatGPT, will be honest to you, because it's faster. And that's have to be it. So let's give it a try. What are we doing? We're doing an API mesh. Let me refresh. We're doing API mesh update, mesh.js, and then we define in also secrets, because now we have a secrets. Yes, we want to update. Let's wait a sec. And while the mesh is provisioned, I want to show you something else, which I also put here, but didn't talk about this a lot. So when you request in the token has lifetime, right? So you can use this token for some time in the future. This means if you every time doing the call to the GraphQL, the hook will fetch token again and again and again and again and again. And that will cause a problem that, first of all, you're doing the calls which you don't need to do. You're creating too many requests in total, and that's not very good for the overall performance. What you can do with the hooks, you can cache the data there. So the hooks has a persistent storage inside. So to cache the token, what are we doing? We define in the context, which is our state here. And then you can just cache token by sending the state. And then you can make a put. If you'll do the put, you define in the token, the key, the value, and the TTL, how long you want to save it for. And then when the next time the request will come for request IMS token, before it's getting that cache token and validate. And if it's already existed, just will return your token again. So the token is saved in a cache for X period of time. And then if it's expired, you will be like the system will fetch a new one. If it's still valid, you will get in like the same one. You can also add the validation there if the token been expired, then it's refreshing the cache. That's also possible. So feel free to write whatever you want there, but state is a very powerful tool you can use for sure. Just maybe 1 minute to show you the documentation. So to have a state enabled, you need to have this entry in your mesh file. Don't forget about it. I have it, but first of all, I forget when I did it. And then you can, you just iterate with the state by this API, and that's how it works. So the context state put, again, get and delete. Okay, let's check our status. So as our mesh has been provisioned, means there are no errors. So let's give it a try. And I got my data. So in this case, as I explained, it's fetching the token, using token to make a further call, and that's it, and you get in the data back. That's it for today. I hope it was useful. I mean, honestly, I already used this approach multiple times. So it's something you will use in the future, I believe. Again, it's not only related to Adobe Commerce SaaS. You can use it for any of your own flows. If you have a third-party APIs, I had a use cases when I have to call 2 APIs, one after another, only to get the token and get a third one. So it's also possible. So feel free. It's not complicated. And I'll tell you more in the next videos, and I hope it was interesting for you. And please don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you found it useful, and we see each other on the next videos. Bye bye.